Sarah could be found at her favorite coffee shop at least once a week. Normally, I would just go there to have a coffee and relax or study, but this time it would be different. He would see something he never expected, his father sitting there with an unknown woman, and he would discover a great secret that would completely change his life. Before we continue, please take some time to subscribe to Dailydose, like and share this video with your friends. As Sarah stood in line at the cafeteria, she couldn't believe what she saw. There was his father, sitting with an unknown woman. They looked very close and seemed like they were having a great time. Was her father really cheating on her mother? Soon he would know the truth. Sarah decided that she needed to talk to her father and let him know that she had caught him with another woman. Her first instinct was to call her mother, but then she thought of a different way to deal with it. I was definitely afraid of what would happen, but I had to do it. Minutes later, tears ran down her face. He discovered the enormous secret that his father had been hiding from him, a lifetime. I couldn't have guessed that in a million years. Who was this strange woman? What had Sarah discovered? And why had his father kept it a secret for so long? She went to this coffee shop at least once a week and had already tried almost every item on the menu. While you were in line, waiting to place your order, you looked around and saw a familiar face. It was his father. Shouldn't I be at work at this time of day? She then decided to go say hi to him after receiving his request. He was also very curious as to why he was here, but he would ask him in a minute. She paid for the drink and took a few steps toward him, and then her heart sank. She quickly hid behind a desk so he wouldn't see her. He needed to take a closer look, just to make sure he wasn't imagining things. At first, he thought there must be something wrong with his eyes, but when she watched him from behind a large plant, there was no more room for uncertainty. Sarah had doubted her own eyes, but now she was sure of it. His father was sitting with another woman. At first, he thought that the woman might be a friend of his or even a colleague, but after a while, he realized that these were not realistic options. This woman definitely did not behave like a simple friend or colleague. They seemed too close for that, Sarah thought. Moments later, he saw his father hug the woman and kiss her on the forehead. Sarah was shocked, to say the least. A million questions crossed Sarah's mind. Who was this woman? And why was her father there with her? How did they know each other? And, more important, why hadn't his father told him? She couldn't believe she was asking herself this question. But, was your father cheating on your mother? The more Sarah looked at them, the angrier she became. His father and his wife laughed a lot, and at one point she even put her hand on his arm. Who was she? Why was he behaving like this? And why didn't her father stop her? Sarah realized what she was seeing, but she couldn't believe it. As far as she knew, her parents had an amazing marriage and were always faithful to each other. Sarah had always admired her father and could never have imagined that he would betray her mother. She wished there was another explanation, but the signs were obvious. Something was definitely going on. Sarah was furious, and her first instinct was to call her mother. But just as she was about to press the button on the phone, she froze. Sarah imagined herself breaking this news to her mother over the phone and decided that this was not the way to find out. She was glad she was wearing sunglasses because her eyes filled with tears just thinking about it. She decided to skip her next classes and tell her mother as soon as she got home. But first, he had to do something else. Sarah would never forgive her father for that. She wiped away her tears and sadness gave way to anger. She needed to let him know that she had caught him red-handed and that she would not let him get away with it. And this woman, she was just as horrible as he was. Sarah noticed that her father hadn't removed his wedding ring. Therefore, the woman knew that he was married. He didn't even try to hide it. Didn't you mind a bit? Sarah just had more questions and still no answers. She was determined to find out what was going on. He thought of different ways to face his father. I felt like I was on an emotional roller coaster. Of course, she was furious with him, but at the same time, she was heartbroken. How could he do that to her mother and her? Sarah and her father had a great relationship and kept no secrets from each other, or so she thought. She decided to send him a message, just to remind him that he already had a family. How would you react when you saw your name appear on your phone? He would surely have a look of remorse or guilt on his face, or maybe even leave this woman and go home. She didn't want him to know she had him, not yet. So she decided to send a normal text, nothing out of the ordinary. Hey Dad, I'm in the mood for pizza today. Want to order tonight? She made sure to add some hearts too. Sure enough, the text notification appeared on his phone. Sarah's eyes widened. He saw his father pick up the phone, see the message, and show it to the woman. That must mean that he had told her about Sarah. And yet, didn't he walk away? Then something else happened that shook Sarah completely. Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. He saw his father pick up the phone, see the message, and show it to the woman. That must mean that he had told her about Sarah. And yet, didn't he walk away? Then something else happened that shook Sarah completely. The woman rested her head on her father's shoulder as they both stared at their screen. Suddenly, Sarah's cell phone rang. She had received a text from her father. "Of course, darling. Did you check in with Mom?" Hugs. Sarah couldn't believe it. How could her father sit there, texting his only daughter and pretending everything was normal while clinging to another woman? From the way they carried themselves, it was clear that the two were not strangers to each other. How long had this been going on? Sarah decided that she needed to put an end to this. She would face them directly. His father needed to explain himself right now. As she approached the table, her heart was pounding in her chest. She tried to sound brave, but in reality, she was terrified. Terrified to confront them and find out the truth. He hoped he had done everything wrong, but what if this woman really was his father's mistress? Finally, she approached, but neither her father nor the woman saw her. She touched his shoulder and said, "Hi, Dad." When he turned to look at her, he couldn't hide the look of surprise on his face. "Sarah," he exclaimed, looking at her with wide eyes. "Hello, honey, what are you doing here?" asked her father. Sarah didn't know what to say. He kept looking at the woman and saw that although she seemed nervous, she didn't seem embarrassed. His blood began to boil again. How could she sit here, as if she didn't want to steal her father from her mother? Finally, he answered his father's question and explained that he was on his study break. "But I have many more questions for you," he thought, but he didn't say it aloud. She didn't want to make a scene and hoped her father would explain himself without her having to ask. And he did. "Sarah, there's one person I'd like you to finally meet," she said with a twinkle in her eye, looking at the woman sitting next to her as she put her arm around her. Sarah couldn't believe what she had just heard. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her. She stood there frozen and not knowing how to react. Her father must have sensed that she was uncomfortable as he released the woman and leaned into Sarah. He sighed, took her hands and pulled her to sit next to him. He had a lot to say. Reluctantly, she sat down and he met her eyes. She knew he wanted to talk to her, and she wanted to run away, afraid of the words that would come out of his mouth. But she didn't know that at the end of that day, her life would change completely. "Look, daughter, I'm sorry I kept this secret from you for so long. But you need to understand that it was for your own good. I was just doing what I thought was best for you." "No, you weren't," Sarah thought. All this time, the woman sat next to him without saying a word. Sarah wanted to yell at him, but stopped herself. She decided that she needed to deal with it as an adult, even if it was very difficult for her. "For a long time, we thought it was best not to tell you that. But things have changed, and we think you're old and responsible enough to deal with it now." Sarah was confused. What was he talking about? Who were the us he mentioned? She couldn't be talking about him and Mom, right? Or did he mean Mom knew that? She knew her mom would never agree to that. He looked back at the woman sitting next to him, and she walked over to them, ready to join the conversation. Sarah needed all the willpower she had not to roll her eyes and walk away. Her father introduced the woman. "Sarah, this is not how I planned for you to meet, but here we are. This is Jonah." Jonah looked up at Sarah with a shy but bright smile that Sarah knew she would have loved under other circumstances. But at the moment, she could only look back with a blank look on her face. I still couldn't believe this was happening. Was her father really introducing his lover to his own daughter in such a casual way, as if it was perfectly normal? What did he expect her to do, shake his hand or give him a hug? It was obvious that Jonah was a little nervous about meeting Sarah. She didn't shy away from eye contact, but she was always moving her hands and seemed a little tense. Sarah had already realized this, but did nothing to comfort her. Why do that? You see, Sarah was wrong. Her father finally explained to her what was really going on, and when Sarah realized the truth, everything fell into place. Now he understood why this woman, Jonah, seemed so close to his father. Now she knew that her father was not cheating on her. She found out who Jonah really was and was relieved and very surprised at the same time. She immediately felt ashamed that she had thought that her father had betrayed her mother. Of course, she would never do that. They sat there and talked for hours. Sarah got to know Jonah very well, and by the end, she was very excited to meet her. His father was relieved to see the two of them coming together like this, and he knew he had done the right thing. They didn't even notice that it had gotten dark outside. Then Sarah's dad said, "Hey, I'm hungry. How about that pizza?" They decided that Jonah would join them for dinner, and Sarah asked why she wouldn't spend the night with them. "I would even sleep there,"